But we want to talk about it more with Sean Spicer, NewsNation political analyst, and at the time, White House press secretary for then President Trump. Sean, Republicans and even the former president pointing to the Hunter Biden connection to this baggie of cocaine found in the White House. That would be just a little too easy.
Well, it's also it just doesn't make sense. I don't think Hunter Biden would come in. So what that area is as Allison pointed out, it's right off that West Executive Avenue where the vice president parks his car and other senior staff come in. The Situation Room is right out there. But before you get in, there's a little vestibule area where people can leave their phones for security reasons. I don't think Hunter Biden would be going to check in his phone. He doesn't need to as a member of the First Family. So that kind of doesn't make sense. But I do think that there are broader security issues at hand because, yes, this time it was cocaine, but what if this was some kind of weapon of mass destruction or fentanyl or something more potent? I think there are broader concerns about who had access to that. I also think that the White House sort of misleading us early on about where this happened and trying to make it seem like it's a heavily trafficked area where kids are going through who are on their West Wing tour was really unfortunate because that's just not true.
Well, and is that an indication that they were trying to kind of cushion the location of these drugs, or they just found out new information, just didn't want to tell us right away?
I don't think the location would have been that hard. I mean, you would have known that right away. The Secret Service could have told you. But remember, the only people that are coming through that entrance are senior staff and then quote unquote, their guests, meaning that if they have a meeting or somebody that they're bringing in, this is not an entrance that just the average person can use. And when the White House says that it's heavily trafficked, that's false and misleading at best. You have to have a purpose for coming through there. You don't come through that entrance unescorted by a non-senior staff member.
But I think they were saying that, of course, it made sense with the first location. Now that it's changed to the second location, who exactly would have had access to that floor?
Right. And so the only people who can come through are people with, at that time, like a West Wing badge. So if you work in the old executive office building, the EOB, the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, you don't necessarily get access to the West Wing. It's First Family and then people who have meetings with people in the West Wing. But again, they're escorted in. So it's not as though there's random people just coming in that entrance. It's a very high level entrance for people to be going through. And again, if for what I understand, if you're looking at that door right now, right when you walk in that West Exec Ave door, there's a box, a series of shelves where people who have a mobile phone would check in their phone so that they're not bringing in a mobile device into the West Wing. So that's why, if that's where it is, someone's taking that out of their pockets, putting it right there. It's at that point, that's usually a guest of somebody. So again, I think this investigation should yield something because it's a very limited amount of people that they should be able to look at who got waved in at one of the two entrances on West Executive Avenue, and then who dropped off stuff, and that should be pretty easy on the surveillance footage. But again, when you walk through that door, the vestibule's on your left, and then you take another few steps, and on your right-hand side is a Situation Room. So it's a very secure area.
It's a secure area, and that makes it more disturbing. But can you just give some perspective to those watching at home? On a scale of 1 to 10, cocaine being found in the White House, wouldn't that be a higher priority than the documents that were found in President Biden, former President Trump's, former Vice President Pence's possession? Or is this something that just adds to another level of things that need to be addressed when it comes to security, when it comes to propriety within this administration and others?
So it's a great question. I think it's all relative, though. If the documents found contained state secrets that were actionable, that somebody could use against us, our people or our policies, then that would be a very high level issue to deal with. It's not the cocaine that necessarily worries me, although obviously having an illicit illegal drug does concern me. It's more if you can get cocaine into the West Wing, into that secure area, what else can you get in? Who brought it in? What were their means? Were they cleared? That shows to me a huge gap in security and also the kind of people that are getting brought in.
What do you think is the proper response from the media, and has it been weighted heavily enough on this story and how important it is?
Well, as I said, Adrienne, I think that the media was misled, as well as the entire American public, about where this was. I had several instances where Secret Service was involved. They are always very responsive, and you sit down like you would in any crisis. Tell me the facts, what happened. The idea that they tried to obfuscate and talk about this being in a place that was heavily trafficked made it seem like some random tourist could have brought it in, which in itself is a problem, but would seemingly tone down the magnitude of the situation. We know by the location of where it is that it had to be somebody who was brought in by a senior staffer or somebody who had business, or, because of the nature of where that was.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.